Okay, Miami has been royally screwed. Um, I still think there's a way for them to get into the playoff, but they are on the outside looking in right now. It makes zero sense to me how a team that you beat in Notre Dame is a whole two spots ahead of you, and you're sitting on the outside looking in. I still think there's a chance for them to make the playoff, and I'll go over that. Let me just go over the quick thing. If I haven't, or if you haven't looked into it or seen the headlines or gone over it, but basically, there's a whole thing about Miami being ranked behind Notre Dame, which is at number 10, and Miami's at number 12. Why? The main reason this is a discussion is because Miami beat Notre Dame in week one of the college football season. I get it, it was a long time ago. It was actually in August, their first game. It was at Miami. It was a close game. And honestly, if you were to ask me if they were to play this weekend or tomorrow or today, who would I bet on? I would say Notre Dame, in my opinion, would be the favorite. But again, that's not up for me to decide. I feel like the more subjectivity we take away from the committee and how they rule the and rank these teams for the college football playoff, the better we will be. So let me just go over some things real quick. So I just want to preface that. One, I think Notre Dame is probably the better football team. But I'm making the argument that Miami should be ahead of Notre Dame because they deserve it more. And they deserve a playoff spot more than Notre Dame does. Let me just go over some things real quick. You would think Notre Dame would be ranked behind Miami with all of this information. So Miami and Notre Dame are both 10 and 2. Miami beat obviously Notre Dame week 1. They have four common opponents because Notre Dame doesn't have a conference, but they play a lot of ACC teams. So they have four common opponents in Stanford, Pittsburgh, NC State, and Syracuse. Miami, against those common opponents, won all four games, and so did Notre Dame. Miami won their four games, and three of the four games have won by a bigger margin than Notre Dame did. So they beat Stanford by 6 more points. They beat Pitt by 9 more points. They beat NC State by 5 more points than Notre Dame did. And then Notre Dame beat Syracuse by like 63 or something. So that's the one they have over Miami. But three of the four common opponents that Miami and Notre Dame played, Miami had the better margin of victory in three of those four games. You look at record versus top 25 teams currently, Notre Dame is 1 and 2, while Miami is 1 and 0. Okay? You look at Miami's win was obviously against Notre Dame, and they have no other games with current top 25 um, teams in college football. Notre Dame is 1 and 2. Their one win is against USC. Not as good as Miami's win, obviously, because Notre Dame is ranked ahead of USC. And their losses come to Texas A&M, number 7, and number 12, Miami. Strength of schedule. Miami's is 44th in the country. Notre Dame is 42nd. Okay, not much difference there. Strength of record, Miami's is 14th, while Notre Dame is 13th. Again, a little better, but not much of a difference. Ranked wins and losses when they played. So Miami played teams like Pittsburgh. They played teams like, I believe it was Florida State, back when they were ranked. Take that for what you will. Obviously, they're not ranked anymore, but I do feel like there is something to be said about if a team was ranked at the time. It should mean something. Miami is 3 and 0. Notre Dame is 2 and 2. The only thing Notre Dame has really on Miami is that their losses are better than Miami's. Notre Dame's losses are to Miami and Texas A&M, while Miami lost to Louisville, and I honestly don't even remember the other team they lost to. But you look at all these things and you read this article, and like you see all these things that Notre Dame and Miami share, and it's like, why in the world would Miami be behind Notre Dame in these playoff rankings? I just read out everything. And again, the only thing really that Miami has that is bad is that their two losses, a 3 point loss and a 6 point loss to unranked teams, be it they're both 8 and 4, SMU and Louisville, are not as good as Notre Dame's losses, which was a 1 point loss to Texas A&M and a 3 point loss to, guess who? Miami. And I think that's the main thing. If you look at NFL, the first tiebreaker is head to head. Like, head to head should mean something. If you have the same record, you should be ahead of the team you beat. Like, I don't see how this is a thing. That's why Oklahoma is ahead of Alabama. Even though Oklahoma, you look at eye test, you look at strength of record, strength of schedule, teams they beat, not as good as Alabama. But guess what? They beat Alabama and they have a same record, so you have to respect that. So I'm not saying like keep Alabama behind Florida State because they lost to them in week 1, because Florida State up to this point has a terrible record now, and you can look at that as like a fluke. I think you should look at record, you should look at head to head, you should look at common opponents. Things that are objective and that you can concretely say, like, okay, this team beat this team, so, and they have the same record, they should be ahead of them. I have no idea why Notre Dame's ahead of Miami. Now, there is a way for Miami to get to the playoff, and I know you might be looking at this, and they're on the outside looking in with conference championship week ahead, and they're not playing. So how will they get in? I will explain what the committee's doing here and why it was smart for them to do all this. And you might be looking at the rankings like, oh, not much changed. There is some actual like big things to note here with this new college football rankings, namely Alabama jumping Notre Dame after a subpar performance against Auburn, and we'll get into that. First off, let's just go over some other things before I get back to this, how Miami can get into the playoff. Texas is out. There is no ins and outs about it. I think they were generous to put them ahead of Vanderbilt. Even though they did beat them, they don't have the same record as Vanderbilt, but I think they're honoring that non-conference game against Ohio State. They're kind of counting it as a half loss instead of a full loss. So Texas did jump up after beating Texas A&M, but the problem is they're still not going to make it. A best case scenario right now is because the line, I know people say 12 teams make it, Texas is only one spot out. If you know how the college football format works, the cutoff line is right here at 10, because with this college football format, you have the 5 highest ranked conference champions making it automatically. That would be the winner of the Big Ten in Ohio State and Indiana, Georgia and Alabama, the SEC champion, Texas Tech or BYU, the Big 12 champion. And then, so let's just say for sake of argument, Ohio State, Texas Tech, and Georgia win those games. Those are 3 conference champions. No one else ranked inside up to 12 are playing for a conference championship. That would be teams like Virginia, Tulane, North Texas, James Madison. So 2 of those 4 teams probably will make it. Either North Texas or Tulane, whoever wins that game, and then either James Madison or Virginia, depending on who wins. If Virginia wins, they're in. So those are the other 2 spots. That's why BYU and Miami are currently right now out of the playoff. So in a best case scenario for Texas, you would have Alabama lose the conference championship, and they lose by so much that the committee just drops them out. So Texas jumps them, even though I doubt Texas would jump 4 spots to be ahead of Alabama, or Alabama would fall 4 spots. And then BYU lose their championship game pretty badly, so they drop out. That one's more realistic. But with that said, Texas then jumps 2 teams, BYU and Alabama. Guess what? Notre Dame and Miami take those spots. And then you're left with the 2 conference champions, so Texas would be the first team out. So Texas, sorry Texas fans, you're out. It's unfortunate, and I know they're going to argue, and this is the thing I don't really understand that I dislike so much, is that they're saying, oh, if we had just played, Eastern Illinois or Eastern Washington instead of Ohio State, we would be in the playoff. Possibly, very much possibly, yes. But it's not the fact that you lost to Ohio State and that's the reason you're out. Texas, you lost to Florida. A not really good Florida team. In the swamp, albeit, but you lost to Florida. You also barely beat Kentucky. You barely beat Mississippi State. That is why you did not make the playoff. Maybe if you had taken care of business against Florida, you would be in the playoff. But sadly, that's not the case. So I don't want to hear Texas fans crying about it. Honestly, I really don't care. Another really huge thing that happened is A&M falling all the way to 7. And I said it before the rankings came out. I thought these were obviously 1 and 2. Georgia would be 3. Texas Tech would be 4. I thought Texas A&M could be in front of Oregon, but I did think Oregon is more deserving. I did not think they were going to fall behind Ole Miss. And people might say that's only 1 spot. It is a huge difference, and we'll get into that. Let's first go over, the resumes. Texas A&M and Ole Miss, both 11-1. They have 5 common opponents. They share 5 common opponents. Texas A&M had a bigger margin of win in 3 of those games, where Ole Miss had it in 2. So Texas A&M wins the common opponent matchup. Texas A&M 1-1 versus top 25 teams. Currently, Ole Miss 2-1. So Ole Miss wins that. Strength of schedule, Texas A&M is 15th. Ole Miss is 40th. So a pretty big margin there. And also considering the fact Ole Miss just lost Lane Kiffin, I'm surprised they dropped them behind Ole Miss. Again, the resumes are close, but I think Texas A&M's resume is a little better, and I don't think they should have been dropped behind Ole Miss. The reason this is huge, and I kind of feel sorry for Texas A&M fans, is because the difference between the 6th and the 7th seed, the way the playoff format is made, is huge. Because if you're the 6th seed, this is what it comes down to. You can look it up yourself. The way the format is, if you're the 6th seed, you are more than likely, I'm like 98% sure, you'll be facing either Virginia, North Texas, Tulane, or James Madison. Not great teams. Virginia, North Texas, Tulane, or James Madison. Those are your more than likely opponents that you will face as the 6th seed. As the 7th seed, the way this playoff format is, more than likely you are going against Miami, Notre Dame, or even possibly Alabama. I don't think Alabama would happen, but either way, Miami, Notre Dame, Alabama, tough teams. Virginia, North Texas, Tulane, James Madison. I mean, say what you want about the Group 5, they're just not as good as Notre Dame, Alabama, or Miami. So this is huge for Ole Miss, that they get essentially this weak team in Virginia, North Texas, Tulane, or James Madison, as opposed to getting Miami, Notre Dame, or Alabama. Like, that's huge, and I feel sorry for Texas A&M, the fact that they dropped behind Ole Miss. But at the end of the day, you could make the argument that the resumes, again, are really close. Obviously, Texas A&M's strength of schedule is much better, but if you look at something like their loss, Ole Miss's loss is much better to Georgia when Texas A&M is to Texas. So, you know, at that, I get it, but it just sucks for Texas A&M fans. Also, one a quick thing to note, because Tulane and North Texas are both ranked, the winner of that championship game will be in the college football playoff. And if Virginia wins, they will be the other conference champion that gets in. But if they lose and Duke is not ranked, then James Madison will be that team if they win their conference championship, which is crazy to think. You could have two Group of 5 teams, either Tulane or North Texas, and then James Madison, both in the college football playoff. Honestly, I'm here for it, just to add some excitement to it. But at the end of the day, it's very possible that the ACC gets no one in the college football championship. I mean, in the college football playoffs. But more than likely, Virginia will win against Duke. I do think they'll beat Duke, and if they win, they're in. So you don't have to worry about that if you're the ACC. Still in your hands. Let's just go over real quick why Notre Dame and Miami, this whole discussion is not done. Even though people would say, oh, it's done, I don't think it is. Here's what you have to look at. I look at these teams. I look at 8 teams that are safe. That is the top 8. Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Texas Tech, Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma. So Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Oregon do not play this weekend. They're not going to drop out that much. Even if a team, like say Alabama, jumps them, they're only moving down one spot. They're all in safely still. Texas Tech, if they lose their conference championship, they're 4 right now. So I don't think they'll drop out. Georgia, same thing. I don't think they'll drop out. Indiana or Ohio State obviously won't drop out if they lose. So these 8 teams are safe, and they're going to be in the college football playoff. Granted, depending on the results of this weekend, they could drop a couple spots, but they're not dropping out of the college football playoff. That is guaranteed for me. And then, so you have 8 teams in. That means you have 4 spots left. 9, 10, 11, and 12. But again, you have to remember, conference champions, we need 5 conference champions. So that would be a combination of Virginia, if they win, they're in. And the winner of North Texas and Tulane, whoever wins that, would be in. Those would be other 2 teams. If Virginia loses, then the winner of this would be in. And if James Madison win, they would then be in. Either way, you have someone not inside the top 15 or even 16. Two of those teams are going to be in. So more than likely it will be Virginia and Tulane or North Texas, or Tulane or North Texas and James Madison. So that's 2 other spots taken up. That means you have 2 spots left in the college football playoff, with those teams being Alabama, BYU, Notre Dame, or Miami getting those last 2 spots. And one simple way to do this, if Alabama wins their conference championship and BYU wins their conference championship. Guess what? Those are your last two teams. Notre Dame and Miami both don't make it, which would be somewhat nice for the committee because then they don't have to worry about, oh, we don't have to worry this whole discussion about Miami versus Notre Dame, the thing we've been avoiding this whole time. We don't have to worry about that. So that's what happens. If Bama and BYU win, they're both in, and that's your 12 teams. If Bama loses, I find it really hard to believe that they would drop completely out of the playoff. I wouldn't put it past the committee to do that, though. And then if BYU loses, sadly, I think they would be out 100%. That means more than likely Alabama is safe regardless. That means there's one spot left for either Notre Dame or Miami. The reason I say Miami can still make it is because the whole time, the first time the college football playoffs made their rankings, it was Notre Dame was quite ahead of Miami. I think Miami was like 18 or something. I thought they figured that Miami would lose another game and they wouldn't have to worry about comparing Notre Dame and Miami. Because clearly they like Notre Dame more, and I would even say I think Notre Dame is probably a better football team. That's not how I would rank this though. And so the more Miami played, the more they've won, blown teams out, and they've gotten closer and closer, and now they're one team separates them from Notre Dame. That's why it was huge that the committee jumped Alabama above Notre Dame because there's only one team now in front of them. And this is why it's important. If BYU loses the conference championship game, whether you believe it or not, and I think it's probably unfair, BYU will probably be out of the playoff and will drop behind Miami. What does that mean? Miami is now right behind Notre Dame. And the committee has said that if you're not playing in conference championship week, you're probably not going to change standings or rankings compared to other teams that aren't playing. So in reality, Miami would move up, but they wouldn't go past Notre Dame. However, there's a world that I do not see happening. There's like no chance that if BYU loses and Miami jumps them, there's no way Notre Dame is going to be the last team to make it in the playoff and Miami's the first team out, especially when they're right next to each other in the rankings and Miami beat them with the same record. If you're the committee, you're just asking for Miami fans and a lot of college football fans, including myself, to be outraged at this. And at that point, it would be a lose-lose situation because if you're a Miami fan and you didn't make it in, you'd be like, we're ranked right behind Notre Dame and we beat them. And so, like, we should 100% be ahead of them. You won head-to-head, strength of schedule, strength of ranking, common opponents. We win all those arguments. But if you're a Notre Dame fan and this scenario happens and Miami does jump Notre Dame because the committee realizes we can't have Miami just one spot behind Notre Dame and the first team out in the college football playoff, when they beat them, the Notre Dame fans are going to be like, well, we've been ahead of Miami this whole time, and when both teams don't play, how does Miami jump you? And that's a valid argument to have. I think the committee has kind of shot themselves in the foot here. I think they're really hoping for an Alabama and BYU win because at that point you would have your 12 teams guaranteed in, like no contest. It would be easy. BYU would be in, and then you would have two teams, North Texas, Tulane, James Madison, Virginia, and Miami and Notre Dame would both be out, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. There's a world where if Alabama loses and BYU loses, you put both of them in, and Alabama's kicked out, but Alabama fans would not be happy about that because then you'd be sending the message to other teams that, if you make your conference championship and you lose it for playing another game against a really good team, even in Georgia, number 3 Georgia, then you could still follow the playoff, and that doesn't set a good precedent. So I honestly think Miami has a better chance of making the playoff than Notre Dame. And I know that's crazy because they're not ranked. They're 2 spots behind them right now. But again, if Texas Tech beats Miami is jumping BYU. And that means Miami would be right behind Notre Dame. And there's no way Miami is ranked right behind Notre Dame with the same record, same strength of schedule, same strength of record basically, better common opponent wins, and a head-to-head win against Notre Dame, and be left out of the playoff, being ranked right behind them. The committee, I don't think, is going to do that. And so, if I was a betting man, and I'm not, I would bet on Miami making the playoff more than Notre Dame making the playoff. That's just my take on it. So as much as I think the committee kind of shot themselves in the foot by putting Miami so far back in the first initial rankings that they've had to claw themselves up to this spot, the committee knows what they're doing, and there's a reason Alabama jumped them for playing well against Auburn, which is just bullshit. Because they want this one team buffer and flexibility to do whatever they want to do, basically, when conference championship weekend is done. So that's the way I see it. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Peace.